listener production.
Hi, Sasha Barbagat with you. Welcome to The Briefing. Are you gearing up to spend your hard-earned bucks this Black Friday? It's been almost impossible to miss the flood of aggressive marketing from retailers ahead of the sales this week. But is it the sale of the year or just the best marketing ploy ever?
We're looking at a overall spend around the country of $6.7 billion during the 4 days that make up Black Friday and extend across the weekend through to Cyber Monday. And that's a pretty sizable chunk of money.
Coming up in the second half of this episode, how this American shopping event suddenly became so big in Australia and how you can avoid getting sucked in by marketing and snatch a genuine bargain. First though, let's get into the headlines with Chris Spiru. It's Wednesday, November 27.
Morning, Sash. Morning, everybody. 8 people in Laos have been arrested over the suspected methanol poisoning that killed 6 backpackers, including 2 Australians. Local police say the men who were detained all worked at the Nunna Backpackers hostel in the popular tourist town of Van Vieng. Holly Bowles and Bianca Jones, both 19, had been staying at the accommodation when they fell ill, both later dying in Thai hospitals. Their bodies arrived home in Melbourne overnight, accompanied by their devastated parents.
4 other tourists from Denmark, the UK and the US also died, and it's believed all the victims drank alcohol that had been contaminated with methanol, but it is still not known where those drinks were served. It comes with reports a third Australian had fallen ill in Van Vieng after this suspected mass methanol poisoning. Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs says that person is in a stable condition. Now, as you mentioned, Chris, the families of those girls have come home overnight. So sad. They did speak to reporters at Melbourne Airport and they said, please give us some privacy over the next few days. We want to grieve. But what they have been doing is trying to raise awareness about methanol poisoning and methanol contamination. And there is a GoFundMe that's been set up on behalf of the Jones and Bowles families to help this campaign, and it's already raised over $330,000.
To the Middle East now, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has announced a ceasefire plan with Hezbollah.
The duration of the ceasefire depends on what happens in Lebanon. We have an understanding with the United States. We are maintaining our full liberty to take military operations. If Hezbollah tries to attack us, if it arms itself, if it rebuilds infrastructure next to the borders, we will attack them. If they launch missiles, if they dig tunnels, we will attack.
There are reports the agreement, brokered by the US, gives Israel and Hezbollah 60 days to withdraw its forces from Lebanon's south so the Lebanese army and UN peacekeepers can move in. In the hours prior to the announcement, though, Israel bombed 20 sites in the capital Beirut, which it says are Hezbollah targets, killing 10 people. The IDF issued evacuation notices in those locations, the largest such warnings to date.
Yeah, and this follows the IDF's report of 10 rockets being launched from Lebanon into northern Israel earlier in the day. More than 3,500 people have been killed in Lebanon since hostilities flared between Hezbollah and Israel after October 7, while 60,000 Israelis have been displaced from the border region. So it's important to note, Chris, that this is a plan, but the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu has come out to say that this is what he wants means it'll likely pass. It still needs to be voted on by the full cabinet, though. It's important to note, too, that a ceasefire with Hezbollah does not affect anything happening in Gaza. So the war and he made that point in his speech, the war continues, their objective continues, nothing will change in Gaza, even though they've agreed to this ceasefire with Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Back home now, Labor is continuing its bill blitz as we enter the final couple of sitting days of Parliament for 2024. There's been good news for anyone with student debt overnight, like myself, with the government's plans to wipe $3 billion off the books passing. The changes to indexation on HELP, vet student loans and Australian apprenticeship support loans is expected to benefit 3 million Australians. It caps the indexation rate to the lower of either the Consumer Price Index or the Wage Price Index. So someone with a debt of $30,000, for example, will have $1,345 wiped off, and a 15% pay increase for early childhood educators also passed overnight, Sash.
Yeah, and happening today, meantime, will be the introduction of a bill to bring massive new fines for the supermarkets. So the legislated penalties will be up to $10 million, and they'll be enforced if Coles, Woolies or the other big grocery chains breach the Food and Grocery Code of Conduct. This was the one that has now been made mandatory mandatory. Before they created it, the supermarkets created this code of conduct, and they could choose whether they followed it or not. Now it's mandatory for them to follow it. We are, however, still waiting on the social media ban to be voted on and, of course, Labor's big housing reforms, which the Greens have now agreed to support.
And the rap beef between Drake and Kendrick Lamar has taken a new turn, with it now heading to court. Drake, who's often celebrated as the most commercially successful hip-hop artist of his generation, has launched legal action against Universal Music Group, claiming that the company falsely inflated the popularity of Kendrick's diss track, Not Like Us. The song, which has over 900 million streams on Spotify, takes several swipes at the Canadian rapper.
Say Drake, I hear you like I'm young. You better not ever go to Cell Block 1. To any bitch that talk to him and they in love, just make sure you hide your little sister from him.
So Drake is demanding that Universal Music Group, which distributes records for both rappers, release information and possible evidence proving it made the diss track go viral. So it artificially made this track go viral. Drake is alleging that the music giants used bots and pay-to-play agreements with radio stations and streaming services and fired employees who were seen as Drake loyalists to hide their scheme. The group has called the allegations offensive and untrue. Interestingly, this beef has been battled on records and in the music studio, Chris, and now it's gone to court.
Yeah.
I mean, part of me is like, Drake is just having a big sookie whinge that Kendrick had a better song than him. Yeah. But we did deep dive their beef, which has been going on for a while now, and that was back on May 8 of this year. God, I can't believe it was that long ago. And that was with hip-hop journo Simone Amelia Jordan. She gave us an excellent rundown of all the beef between Drake and Kendrick Lamar. Chris, thanks so much for joining us for the headlines. Next up, we are getting into our deep dive on Black Friday, what you need to look out for, whether it's just a massive marketing ploy, and how to snag a bargain. Because at the end of the day, what else do you want in the lead up to Christmas?
Hey, Bension here. One of the biggest retail sales events in Australia is starting this Friday. In case you've somehow missed it, it's called Black Friday and continues across the weekend into the following Monday, branded Cyber Monday, for all those online deals. Brands from across the board are clambering over each other to offer us what they describe as big Black Friday discounts. Everything from iPhones to silicone stackable cats to lawn fertilizer to handbags is on sale. And among other things, in a year of cost of living crisis stories, a lot of people are hoping to get all their Christmas shopping done cheaply and in one hit. But it wasn't always this way. Black Friday, which apparently dates back to a panic on US gold markets in the 1800s, once seemed a decidedly American-only thing. But like Halloween, this sales event has snuck its way across the Pacific and seems very much here to stay. So how did this happen? How big an economic event is Black Friday exactly? And how do we snag a genuine bargain? Chief Industry Affairs Officer at the Australian Retailers Association, Fleur Brown, says the numbers make it undeniable. Black Friday is a very big deal.
Look, it's an ever-increasing big deal for Australians. Of course, it's been big in the US for a long time, and we're just catching up, really. So every year we see the numbers grow, and this year is definitely not an exception. We're looking at quite a strong year-on-year increase in shopping this year.
When did Black Friday become an actual thing in Australia?
The last 5 years have been a real tipping point. Before that, it's been edging up as an event.
And can you give us an idea of just how big it is? What kind of figures are we talking about here?
We're looking at a overall spend around the country of $6.7 billion during the 4 days that make up Black Friday and extend across the weekend through to Cyber Monday. And that's a pretty sizable chunk of money. A lot of that money will be spent in store and not just online as well.
Is part of it that there's been such a cost of living crunch over the past year that people take a big, huge sale like this and they think, now is the time that I'm going to get some really good deals and I better do that now rather than waiting later till I'm going to spend on Christmas?
Spot on. We're definitely seeing that trend this year more than ever. Interest rates have not come down and the household budgets are tighter and tighter. And so Australians are looking for every opportunity to grab a bargain and get value for money. So they're making a list and checking it about 15 times this year when it comes to Christmas shopping, or peak season, for others. Not everyone celebrates Christmas, of course.
Mark Serrels is editorial director at the consumer advocacy organisation Choice. He says shoppers can in fact get a great deal on Black Friday, but don't be fooled into thinking that deal won't come around again.
I always say that the one thing you should remember during any sales period, but maybe more so during Black Friday sales period, is that you're not always getting the very best deal. Even you might be getting a good deal, but you're probably not getting the very best deal. And even if you are getting the best deal, that deal will probably appear again at some point during another sales period. I think those emails, the constant communication and the ads and social media, they're trying to pressure you into thinking, I need to buy this now because this is a once-in-a-lifetime deal, but that's hardly ever the case.
Swinburne Professor of Marketing Sean Sands says this massive sales event can be a double-edged sword for retailers.
I think what it was in the past is it was this kind of one-day event almost where there was this pent-up demand and sales went live and there was kind of, like a 24, 48-hour period of time where people could shop. And that had huge spikes. I remember, sort of 5+ years ago, there were all these issues where websites were crashing and kind of too much demand and that kind of thing. But now retailers are trying to get ahead of one another. So they're trying to kind of, get out a little bit further in advance and start the promotions a bit earlier. That has the benefit of kind of spreading the demand across. So that creates, a little bit easier on systems like e-commerce systems, but also supply chains and distribution systems as well. So the downside is really that people just become so prone to sale periods. And this was the big issue with department stores over the last kind of 5+ years, where this kind of just feels like they're always on sale. So if there's, weeks and weeks and weeks that will lead up to this potential promotion period or sales period, people almost become so used to it that they forget about it almost, and they kind of, think I'll get to it at some point, but they never really get to doing the shopping, or they end up just delaying it and skipping that or missing that kind of peak sale period.
So are we approaching a ceiling, or is this just going to get bigger? Fleur Brown from the Retailers Association again.
We still have quite a long way to go before we'd reach the intensity of Black Friday sales in the US. So there's still a lot of retailers who have yet to come on board, even though it looks and feels like everyone's on board. But, we're still seeing in small businesses, for example, there's a lot of room for growth. So we would argue that we'll see this event continue to grow in the coming years, and we may reach that sort of height that we see in the US, where it's got pretty much saturation coverage from all retailers.
Boxing Day sales used to be the biggest sale event in Australia. Has Black Friday overtaken them?
Look, it's hard to compare the two because they're really quite different events. So if we're talking about hype, certainly you could argue that Black Friday's a much more hyped event than Boxing Day, but they do serve different purposes. So as we've discussed, Black Friday is often an event that people are looking at for their Christmas shopping in advance. We're looking at Boxing Day sales being more those kind of larger or common household items, the gift for self, not so much the gift for others during that event. So it's not quite an apples with apples comparison, but definitely Black Friday is dominating, when it comes to buzz.
If people are looking for the best bargains this Black Friday, are there particular categories of goods where they could expect the most serious discounts?
It's really across the board now. Many, many retailers are participating, and so you're seeing all kinds of retail in on the action. These sorts of sales events can be a trigger for large items like technology purchases, particularly going into a new year. Some of those items are the sorts of things that people look out for. Clothing can often be really common purchase item as well. And then, of course, anything that fits into that gift category. And this year with gifts, we're seeing a trend towards those little luxuries. So you might have heard of the lipstick effect, people spending on things that might not be as expensive, but they're still considered luxury items, things that you wouldn't indulge yourself in on an everyday purchase.
So little treats, in other words.
Exactly. We found Aussies don't want to go without those experiences. They want their loved ones to feel like they're connected and they're still spending, but just in a smaller way often.
But not every business is out there to hand out excellent bargains out of the kindness of their heart. We have seen Coles and Woolworths taken to court over allegations of putting prices up and then bringing them down by less than that and calling them some kind of bargain. Should we expect that kind of tomfoolery, skullduggery and dirty bastardry during Black Friday as well?
Oh, I'm really happy you used the word skullduggery, one of my favourite words. Yeah, you should expect a bit of that. I think not necessarily that the deals won't be deals or the sales won't be sales, but there's definitely a lot of like sneakiness in trying to make it feel like it's a bigger deal than it actually is. So a TV that was $4,000 last week might be $3,500 this week, but on that little sale thing they'll say, this is a $6,000 TV and we're discounted to $3,500. Look at the massive discount. And actually that's the old RRP. Like, they'll do a lot of that stuff. I mean, it's hard for me to say that they're going to be kind of dodgy as Woolies and Coles because they've been caught so many times doing this, and I don't want to accuse anyone of doing the same thing without evidence.
Overall, what are your top tips for getting a great deal this Black Friday?
All right, I'm glad you asked. So step one, go in with a plan. Don't just go onto a website thinking, I want to buy something. I do this all the time. I just want to spend money. I just want to buy something, anything. You want to make sure you go
Take
on there. Take
my money.
Yeah, please. I think going on there with I need a new TV, or I need a new fridge, or I need a new set of headphones, and this is what I'm willing to spend. I think if you go in with that kind of plan, you're less likely to just, impulse buy. So I think that's one part of it. The second part is research, what the general price is you should be expecting to pay for a certain device. Then you're less likely to, get suckered into some sort of deal that isn't really that great of a deal. But probably point number 3, and this is the most important one, do not feel pressured to buy anything on Black Friday because it is Black Friday. Like I said earlier, a deal that exists on Black Friday will almost certainly come up again at some point, whether that's January sales or even just, a sale that brand's doing by themselves on a completely different month. Never feel that pressure to just buy.
Mark Serrells with some good advice there. He's the editorial director at Choice. Before that, you heard the Australian Retailers Association's Fleur Brown and Sean Sands from Swinburne University. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That's it for now. Before you go though, we'd love it if you could share this ep with someone you think might enjoy it. Meanwhile, hit that follow button on Instagram. We're at The Briefing Podcast. And on TikTok and YouTube, just search Listener Newsroom. We'll be back in your feed with another episode this afternoon from 3. I'm Bension Siebert. Catch you next time.
Listener.